Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We're waking up with watches this weekend, and everything is for sale. For pricing and details, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for any watch you see here. Again, tmosso at thewatchbox.com gets you directly to me and my team. And if you're thinking of maybe selling or trading a watch, well, we're interested in buying and building inventory, so please reach out to me directly, sell a watch or buy. We pay cash, no upper limit on value paid. And once again, if you wish to sell or trade, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's get started with an impressive piece. Literally an all-timer. We're talking about the Longa und Söhne Datograph. Now this is the Datograph up-down model launched in 2012, a larger case, 41 millimeters. Compared to the 1999 original, this one's 2 millimeters larger. It has a 60-hour rather than a 36-hour power reserve, and there's a power reserve indicator down at 6 o'clock. The dial is still made of sterling silver and black galvanized. You can see it has tone-on-tone silver registers, 18-karat rose gold hands, indices, and frame for the date. You have a pusher system for the crisp date change, but it pales in comparison to the crispness of the column wheel feel. And of course, it is a flyback chronograph, which means you can reset and restart with a single push of the button. Tachymeter outboard for gauging the speed of, say, a car over a kilometer, base 1,000 meters, and then flip it over and you can see that the movement, as ever, is gorgeous. Take note, the dial is sportier than you might first suspect. It is both loomed and equipped with a stepped-up tachymeter, so it's very much a sports chronograph in a dress watch shell. The movement. Did I say the watch was an all-timer? The caliber L951 here, L9516, an evolution of the original. Aesthetically, it's easily the equal of the original. It's a bit more technically sophisticated. Now you can see it has a big slow beating balance, 18K is the vibration rate, overcoil hairspring, 5-position adjustment. Everything you see here in silver is made of steel and hand finished, and everything that has that golden hue is German silver, a nickel copper zinc alloy with the copper giving it the golden hue. Note that the clutch itself, just the steel clutch component that's moving right under my finger, it has inward and outward angles, sharp creases, very difficult to finish on brass or German silver, almost impossible to do on steel, and yet Longa has. Note the presence of both black polished and blued screws. One, the blued screws used for fixing components in place, and the other, the polished screws, used for tuning the mechanism. So they have different purposes. Freehand engraved balance cock, black polished swan's neck regulator, mirrored anglage on the edge of every bridge, engine turning on the base plate, satination across the tops of the chronograph components. Very impressive. Jewels set in chaton, fixed by screws, another nod to the pocket watch era, and of course the timepiece. As good as it gets in terms of fine finish, you would need a Grubel 4C to one-up this watch. Speaking to the level of value you get with a standard Longa timepiece. Now throw this one on my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. You can see it is bigger than the original 39. I prefer the 39 for a wrist of 16 centimeters circumference or smaller. If your wrist is my size or larger, you might want to consider this 41. It's not excessively thick. It's got a nice sloped bezel, so you can see it will fit underneath this cuff. It's not super non-compliant with sleeves. It actually works quite well. But the watch is very imposing and stark on the wrist. It's got a lot of presence. If you want a somewhat more subtle Longa, well, this is a limited edition of 500 pieces from 2009, platinum and 39.9 millimeters. This is the 1815 limited edition. The timepiece, of course, made of platinum, but with a dial of sterling silver that then gets a light rhodium plating, a matte rhodium plating to give it a aesthetic somewhere between gray and silver with a soft matte finish that glows rather than reflects brightly in light. The timepiece is thin, as you can see, and on the reverse side, caliber L0511. It is a 55-hour power reserve manual wind with a classical German 3/4 bridge with glasuta stripes. The same standard of finishing that you get in the Datograph, just a little bit thinner in profile to function better as a dress watch. Individually numbered out of 500 pieces, this is an impressive watch that wears much better on a small wrist than the 41mm Datograph does. You can see easily sliding underneath the dress cuff, no issues there. It's also relatively short across the wrist, meaning I can recommend this watch for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. But if your wrist is smaller still and you want to up the ante in terms of complication and exclusivity, made in 2010 in just 68 pieces of rose gold, this is the FP Journey Vagabond 2, the second in the series of jumping display tonneau case watches. It takes after the original 2004 to 2006 Vagabondage 1 with a tonneau case and no mention of the manufacturer's name on the dial side. That was a tradition established with the first model, which used used a movement FP Journe had designed originally for Cartier. With the Vagabondage 2, he upped the ante, adding jumping hours and jumping minutes, complemented by a power reserve indicator, and the timepiece, of course, being relatively thin at 8.1 millimeters, relatively narrow across the wrist at 37.7, and only about 45.3 millimeters from lug to lug. It wears well on a smaller wrist. One of my favorite features here is that there is a smoked sapphire over the movement. The dial side of the movement has that smoked sapphire, and then we have this lovely polished, beveled and satinated steel bridge that frames the seconds, the minutes, and the hours. If you look carefully at this bridge, you can see that not only is it beautifully finished with rose gold inserts for the windows, but it's actually quite asymmetrical. It's a little bit of an amoeba on the dial, and that asymmetry is part of the subtle beauty of this watch. Now, the original watch, of course, was built with a movement that FP Journe had designed in the 90s for a Cartier Tour 2 jump hour, and of course, because it was built for Cartier, it didn't meet his standards of chronometry. I'll shut up for a sec. By the time he got to the second generation watch, he was meeting his standards for chronometry, but he continued the tradition of only putting the maker's name on the reverse side. The movement here is properly shaped and sized for the case, and you can see it is made of 18-karat rose gold. So the 68-piece limited edition in rose gold, they made 69 in platinum, so this is the rarer of the two, but it's a very hefty watch for its compact size because it's full of rose gold and it's made of rose gold. Let's throw it on the wrist. The watch also includes a deployant clasp, which is a rare feature for Journe watches. So it has a little bit more security on the wrist. You can see it's much shorter across the wrist even than the Longa 1815. This is a great watch for a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference, making it both a wonderful option if you prefer traditional sizes and thin watches, but also a viable unisex selection. To collect the 3 Vagabondage watches is one of the ultimate goals of the collector of independent horology or FP Journe, and I have to admit, there we go. I have to admit that the Vagabondage 2 is my favorite of the series. If you want something classical but not hidebound, and you prefer all the fun stuff on the dial side, the Vagabondage is good, but the Brigade Tradition 7057 is better. The original 7027 launched in 2005 at Baselworld, and it was the answer to the question, what should a modern-day Brigade high horology wristwatch look like? They had the Marines, they had the Type 20s, but what would be the heart and soul of the brand on the dress watch side? And the 7027 in 38 millimeters was the answer. Take pocket watch design cues from the Abraham Louis Breguet and Sons era, bring all of that to the dial side of the watch, and then build it with a traditional Breguet case with welded lugs and coined flanks. Now, this model came out in 2010. It is the 7057, so in white gold here, it is 40 millimeters in diameter, not 38. So it's a little bit bigger. It's just over 49 millimeters, 49.6 from lug to lug, and you can see that the case is beautifully made. The lugs welded on by hand, the case flank cold rolled and then hand finished to create that lovely coining. The timepiece with a dial made of solid gold. The solid gold dial is cut on a rose lathe, so real reductive guilloche, or as the dial declares, guilloche main, guilloche by hand. And then that piece of gold, having been cut, is then galvanized this silver, and then that's just the beginning. We have a solid gold guilloche cut dial, but the style of this watch is really built around the movement. That's why the barrel at dead center on the dial takes pride of place. The hands are steel and fired blue. You can see that the train from the barrel through to the great wheel, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, and the escape wheel, it's basically a masterclass in basic watchmaking. As you can see, the transit of the power straight to the balance, but it is not hidebound, as I mentioned. You can see this watch features an overcoil hairspring, Breguet's original parachute shock protection system, so nostalgic functional elements, but also a recessed bolt free-sprung aerodynamic balance, and that is very high-tech. The fact that it hacks means it has a refinement that, for example, you're not going to find on just about any FP Journe mechanical watch. So this is important to me, and I think you would agree that hacking seconds, even for a watch that does not have an overt seconds display, is a wonderful refinement to have. It's just more, and more is always better. Now, in terms of finish, I think you really do need to go all the way up to Grubel 4C to find something comparable, because I want to show you the interiors of these wheels. Most companies, like Vacheron and Patek Philippe, do not mirror bevel the interior of wheels, the spokes and the inner circumference. Here, not only do we have mirror beveling of even the smallest wheels in the train, but the angles where the spokes meet the inner circumference have a sharp V cleft, so inward angles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do you see what I'm saying? On every single wheel. The level of attention to detail is extraordinary. Though the bridges and plates are frosted in pocket watch style, you could see the mirrored anglage is up to par with the best in the industry. This is done finished with gentian wood. It is not a machined bevel. You'll also appreciate the satination on the tops of the wheels as well as the barrel at center. There is a power reserve indicator. Turn it all over, and you can see, once again, beautifully finished movement, a second power reserve indicator showing you the underlying mechanism. And if you look carefully, you can see that Brigade, the name, has been freehand engraved. You can also see that all of the screws here are alternately black polished and fired blue, so no detail overlooked. A truly spectacular watch. Brigade offers one of the best values in handcrafted ultra haute de gamme, and I do put them on par with the likes of, in terms of finish, Kari Voutilainen, Grubel Forsey, Long und Heine, Marco Long. It's that good. It really deserves to be compared to the best of independence, and for that matter, Longa. I would even say, based on the way these wheels are fashioned, a little bit better than Longa. And take a look at the design of the wheels. They use a splayed spoke design reminiscent of old pocket watches and clocks, so everything here carefully considered, no default design elements. Now, if you want something a little bit more mainstream and a bit more compact, 39 millimeters in rose gold, 12.5 millimeters thick, Cellini, reference 50515, the Cellini Date. Rose gold, 39, black guilloche sunray dial, date display. It works a little bit like some Panerai and Omega calibers in that, unlike a standard Rolex movement, you have the ability to move the hour hand independently while the watch is still running. And so you can adjust the date forward or backwards as you're traveling from time zone to time zone. The timepiece does feature a screw-down crown, and it's 50 meters water resistant. 50 meters with a screw-down crown should be surface swimmable, but I think that's going to be more academic. I don't believe anyone's going to test that theory with this watch on a textile strap or a NATO. It wears beautifully. 45 millimeters lug to lug means I can recommend this watch for a 13 centimeter circumference wrist, and it will fit underneath the dress cuff. I'm pulling it tight a little bit so you can get a sense of what it looks like when it's sized and clamped down, but it's really not big at all, and it wears well on my wrist. It wears well under this sleeve. It's gorgeous, and the combination of the black dial and the rose gold case is scintillating. Inside, a 31,000 series movement, or I should say 3100 series movement, much like the 3135. 3165 is automatic, stop seconds, COSC certified, 48-hour power reserve, and it has that unique time zone function with stop seconds. Jumping across Geneva, we take a look at another rose gold watch with a very different mission. Second generation Vacheron Constantin overseas chronograph, 42.5 millimeters by only about 12.6 millimeters thick. The watch is substantial, all in rose gold with a massively constructed and hand-finished bracelet. The meticulous finishing, the faceting of the polish and the satin, and the beautiful breaks between them. The number of styling nuances throughout this watch, from the bezel to the case to the lug hoods to the crown itself. Everything on this watch is thoughtfully designed and then executed by hand. Nickel anthracite dial with rose gold chapter rings, indices, as well as hands and logo, and it features the much-loved double-digit date that was present on the first two generations of overseas chronograph watches. Every single link in the bracelet on both sides is removable for micrometric sizing, and one of the features I love about the second generation overseas that, for example, you don't get on the third generation is that the bracelet will pull straight down. It doesn't fight and flare like a Nautilus or a Royal Oak or a third generation overseas. It pulls straight down, so the watch wears better than the later overseas chronograph when it is on a smaller wrist. And you can see it wraps right around the edge of my wrist. There's no fight, no flare. The watch wears true to size, maybe even a little bit smaller, and it's super flat with a sloped bezel. So even though, yes, it's a sports watch, it's automatic, it's 25,000 ampere per meter anti-magnetic and 150 meters water resistant, all the same, it will fit underneath the shirt cuff. And this watch can be and should be worn with formal attire if you choose. Inside the case, Frederic Piguet 1185. An ultra-thin, automatic winding, column wheel vertical clutch integrated high horology chronograph caliber that is hand-finished. It's surrounded by a soft iron cage Milgauss style for anti-magnetism, and you get a crisp actuation of the watch thanks to the column wheel. It's also a 5-position adjusted chronograph caliber, so it has been adjusted to the high horology and chronometer standard. I should also mention that the watch is nicely finished, so while you can't see it, there'd be no point in a case-back display since there is a soft iron cage around the movement, but it is hand-finished, and it is commensurate to the quality of the watch itself. Let's do a loom shot on that one. As you can see, the Overseas truly is a sports watch, not just an elegant upscale companion, but a real rough and ready sports watch for the summer season that is close at hand. All right, Patek Philippe 5200G. This is a watch that is misunderstood. One of the most appealing Patek Philippe complications and longest-legged standard models. It's part of the Gondolo collection. Blue sunburst dial, applique white gold indices, white gold hands. The timepiece is a triple complication, as it features a power reserve indicator for its 8-day manual wine reserve, a day and a date. Now, the watch has a lovely stacked case profile, a little bit like the tiers of the Chrysler Building, and that is the period that's being referenced here, the first roughly 40 years of 20th century watch design. Now throw it on the wrist, and we'll throw it on the wrist before we do a movement shot. And you can see it really is quite short across the wrist. It's 46.6 millimeters from side to side, and it is 32.2 millimeters from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, not including the crown. It's also very flat. So this is a watch you can easily wear on a smaller wrist, and the more the strap breaks in, the better it's going to fit. The day and the date is super handy, and the fact that the watch features a properly sized and shaped movement means that it is unlike almost every other Patek Philippe watch in the collection. So here you have a movement that is properly shaped for a rectangular case. You can also see that the caliber 2820 REC is properly sized, so while it's the shape of the case, it also fills out the case back. It doesn't feel undersized. Patek's 324s, the newer 26330, the 240 micro rotor, they're all generic movements that get popped into whatever watch needs a manual or an automatic or a micro rotor automatic. This movement, descended from the 5101, truly is built for this type of case, this type of watch, and this size of case. You can also see that the twin barrel movement with its 8-day power reserve is adjusted in 6 positions. It has a silicone hairspring and a free-sprung Gyromax style balance. So with the Patek Philippe seal, that means Patek attests this watch will run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds a day. Look at the mirrored anglage on the edge of these bridges. Look at the light, luminous, and gradiated Côte de Genève laid down by abrasive wheel. The black polished screw heads with chamfered slots and circumference. This finger-style train is a nod to old Geneva watchmaking and the way things used to be, so it's a very traditional watch in that sense. And you can also see that the work done on the wheels is impressive, with satination across their tops and their spokes. Everything about this watch is best in the world in quality. While it's not quite as ornate as the Brigade Tradition we just saw, it's a handsome combination of pedigree, engineering refinement, and fine finish. Patek Philippe always one of the best rounded options in luxury watches. I'm a sucker for a green watch, and this is a model that must have been ahead of its time because it launched in 2018 as a Middle East limited series, not limited to a certain number, but limited in production. And in 2021, it seems like green dials have finally caught up to this IWC Portugueser Annual Calendar Middle East Edition. The watch is reference 5035-10, and the dial, of course, featuring Paradise Green, a repeating motif in Middle Eastern edition watches. It's beautifully made with a steel case, 44.1 millimeters, a sunburst green dial, rose gold accents, and then an all aperture style annual calendar that you need not adjust but once per year during the jump from February to March. I like the fact that the whole thing is a quick set, so you have the ability to cycle the day, and by means of cycling the date, you then cycle the month as well. The timepiece is an automatic winder with a 7-day power reserve, and this movement right here, caliber 52850, it has a 7-day power reserve, but it's its size and stature descended from the year 2000, caliber 5000. Everything has been upgraded here. Over 38 millimeters in diameter, it is the world's largest automatic winding caliber. So it's an annual calendar, stop seconds, quick set annual calendar system. Changes from previous 50,000 and 5,000 series watches. Well, first, it now operates at 28,800 vibrations per hour, unlike the previous 21.6 or 18K beat rates. Also, the watch now features a skeletonized barrel bridge, so you can better see the barrels. The twin barrels fix one of the long-running problems with these 7-day movements, which was that they tended to run very fast when fully wound, and then they lost a lot of time when they were almost discharged. The twin barrels even out the torque release, so you no longer have fast or slow rates at the extremities of the power reserve. Also, we have a full ceramic Peloton pawl-based winding system named after 1940s and 50s IWC watchmaker Albert Peloton, who invented this technology in the late 40s and industrialized it with IWC in the early 50s. The one problem, though efficient and durable, the system always created dirt on the movement because of its habit of shedding flakes from lubricants and metal components. And ultimately with ceramic, you will not shed any components because they're effectively indelible, so little flakes and dust don't chip off. And because there are no lubricants, you don't get tarnishing tar that can flake off the lubricated surfaces. So this is basically the perfect Peloton winding system. And when you see that little triple striped screw, you know it's a counter-threaded screw in a watch movement. So this is really the full package, the best version of the 7-day movement, and in my opinion, the best version of a complex calendar Portuguese. It's a large watch, but not overpowering, about 52.5 millimeters from lug to lug. I can wear it on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and I can identify probably the smallest wrist for this watch being about 15 centimeters circumference, but it really does look good. And since it's a Portuguese, they've always been big since the first reference 325 of 1939. It was huge in its day. These are huge today. So I think that a Portugueser that looks big on your wrist is actually doing exactly what IWC and God intended. Speaking of large watches that wear fairly small, this one's in a class by itself. Though this is a 44.25 millimeter watch, the ceramic case with sapphire crystals front and back weighs feather light on the wrist, and it's only 49 millimeters from lug to lug. So this gray side of the moon, it's the moon watch, gray side of the moon from Omega. It launched in 2014. It remains one of their hottest products, even more desirable than the 2013 sensation dark side of the moon. The gray side of the moon ups the ante. I'll throw it on my wrist real quick and then talk about some of the distinguishing features. As I mentioned, it's fairly short across the wrist for a 44 plus. So even if your wrist is 14 centimeters circumference, you're going to find this one wears well, and it's very, very light. The watch is also almost impervious to scratches thanks to its ceramic case. The nice thing about buying a used ceramic watch is that you know for a fact it is in factory condition, never once refinished. These watches just don't need it. Omega, impressing with its technological might, not just cooking and creating ceramic, but mirror polishing it with the sharp facets and break between satin and polish that you would expect on a steel watch. The crown insert, as well as the entire tachymeter, fully loomed. The hands and the indices are made of white gold. The dial base itself, and you could just see it underneath the hands, PT950. It is a satin frosted solid platinum dial. Yes, you heard that right, solid platinum. The indices and hands in white gold are blackened to contrast better against it. You can see there's a mono counter at 3 o'clock with hours and minutes for the chronograph, which is nice because it keeps the twin register layout symmetrical, a handsome nostalgic look on a watch that still has triple register functionality. And I can change my time zone while the watch continues keeping time. Note the seconds not affected, the chronograph not affected. All of this courtesy of Omega exclusive caliber 9300. 2 barrels for, again, even torque release, just like on the IWC, even torque release from max wind to minimum wind, so it'll never run too fast or too slow. It has a 60-hour power reserve. It is anti-magnetic with a silicone hairspring. It features column wheel chronograph actuation, so it's nice, crisp, and you can really hear it. It has a nice report to it. You can see the column wheel underneath its skeletonized bridge, and it has a vertical clutch, so the seconds hand starts without any jump or stagger, and you can leave the chronograph running if you so choose without endangering the watch. It also features a silicone hairspring, anti-magnetic, very resistant to magnets, a full balance bridge and a free spring index for shock tolerance, and then a tri-level coaxial escapement, which is a George Daniels designed direct and indirect impulse escapement with tangential contact between the impulsing and impulsed surfaces, improving the timekeeping, yes, but also extending power reserve and minimizing the need for service. So this watch truly is the full package, and that's before you see the loom shot. Check out that circular supernova. You can see the Omega logo on the crown. Then you can see the dial fully loomed, including chronograph seconds, and the tachymeter also fully loomed. One of my favorite Omega watches of all time, possibly my all-time favorite. And that's coming from a 2531 owner. Let's talk about two very different white metal chronographs, starting with this model, which came out in 2016 at Baselworld. This is the Patek Philippe 5930G. It is a world time chronograph featuring the historic Louis Cotier-designed world time reference ring system. The timepiece is robust with handsome stepped lugs, a warm white gold case. You can see rectangular vintage-inspired chronograph pushers and a sharp and severe conical bezel, terminating in a dial that features concentric rings outboard 24 reference cities representing 24 principal time zones of the world. You put your current city or location, in the case of Midway, up at 12 o'clock, and then you set your time for your locality. You then read this 24-hour reference ring adjacent to each city to read the hour. So, for example, right now, I'll show you how this works. If we are at 11 a.m., because it's in the silver portion and it's 11, this is 24-hour format. You can see the reference ring is 24-hour format. The silver side is day, the blue side is night, but I'm in Midway and it is 11 a.m. At the same time I'm in Midway and it's 11 a.m., you could see that in Moscow it is 1 a.m. It is 1 a.m. and it is night. It's that simple. In London, it is actually 10 o'clock the previous night, and in Beijing, it is 6 a.m. That's how it works. I want to change my reference city. Let's say I want to go visit friends in Denver, Colorado. That's where my sister lives. And now you can see it is showing me the correct time for Denver, both on the center dial and on the reference ring, as it changes all of the references. If you wish to adjust just the time and the reference ring, you can do so without stepping the city. But the watch is also a flyback chronograph that you can reset and restart. And while it does not feature a hacking seconds display, because of the vertical clutch chronograph engagement, you can just leave the chronograph running and use the flyback to synchronize to a reference time effectively as a zero reset system. Now it is loomed. Not brightly, but it is loomed, and the dial center is a lovely blue guilloche with a grand orge or barleycorn pattern splaying out from center. The caliber is the 28520 that first debuted in 2006 on the Nautilus 5980 and the 5960 annual calendar chronograph. So you're getting a 55-hour automatic winding power reserve, column wheel vertical clutch chronograph actuation, free sprung, 6-position adjustment, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and beautiful finishing that you would expect of a Patek Philippe watch. Patek Philippe cuts far fewer corners on its mass-produced movements compared to, for example, Audemars Piguet or a Moser, which is all about technical sophistication and watch aesthetic, but does not quite finish the movements to the same level in every single watch. Patek does not have that compromise. Even on a caliber 215 manual wind, you're still going to get the same quality of screws and beveling and Côte de Genève, and this movement is a gorgeous example of that no-compromise approach. At 39.5 millimeters, it's not very big. It's full-sized, I would say, by modern standards, but definitely not oversized, and you can see how my 16 centimeter circumference wrist wears it. There's very little danger of overlap at the edge of even a 13.5 centimeter circumference wrist. So this is really a great option. If you're a lady who likes a slightly bigger watch or a guy who prefers more discretion, this size, dark dial, white metal case from Patek is a great way to do it. If budgets perhaps don't accommodate Patek Philippe, you can get just as much manufacturer pedigree from one of the great manufacturers in the business. Turning the clock back to the mid-2000s, this is the Zenith Chronomaster Open XXT with open escapement and a special movement. You can see this movement designed for Terry Nataf, and it is the caliber 4021, a variation on the caliber 4000. Requested by former president, chief designer, and CEO Terry Nataf. He wanted to have all of the fun stuff from the case back on the dial side. So what he created was a special set of evacuated bridges. So you could see through the bridges from the dial side, and you could see the extended pinion of the fourth wheel acting as a tri-spoke constant seconds. After that fourth wheel, you can see the escape wheel. Adjacent to the escape wheel, you can see that there's a bridge pivot for the anchor or the lever, and then you can see the balance and the hairspring. It is like 90% of the fun of a tourbillon for 10% of the price or less. The dial is a handsome black stamped guilloche with applique polished rhodium-coated steel Roman numerals. Note the use of a watchmaker's 4. This is the Zenith model that led me to fall in love with Zenith back before I joined the Navy in 2008. And I remember thinking, wow, you'd really have to do something special to own a watch like that. Years later, I'm still in awe of it. It's big, make no mistake. At 45 millimeters with a loud style, it's very much the Zenith of the 2000s, but unlike the Dayfly Extreme, this design has actually aged quite well. The open dial is still appealing, and in fact, it was probably the most influential part of the Nataf era, as almost everyone copied the open dial, open escapement design. The case is handsome. It's based on the Chronomasters of the 90s with the triple domed bezel and the fluted lugs. It's 53.5 millimeters across the wrist, so though it's a 45, it is wearable. I could wear this watch. The size is brash, but the fit is comfortable, and of course it is an El Primero. You have a power reserve indicator on the dial side for the 52-hour power reserve, and then on the reverse side, automatic winding. You can see the 36,000 vibration per hour balance wheel, and then you can actually see the lateral clutch and the column wheel in action. And the column wheel feel on an El Primero is surpassing, punching far above its weight. It's comparable to something like an L951 in a dotograph. It's that satisfying to flick that column wheel and cycle that chronograph. Full deployant clasp, a couple of upgrades Nataf made across the range. He added folding clasps to almost every Zenith watch when they used pin buckles in the past, and he issued an order that all of the lugs be solid. No lugs should have hollow perforations. So he did make some substantive upgrades, and this remains his design opus, the single greatest legacy of Terry Nataf to the watchmaking world. Grunerfeld, Tim and Bart, the brothers. From the Netherlands, they are the horological brothers together. And in late 2018, they launched the 1941 Principia Automatic, 39.5 millimeters here in rose gold. It was the brothers' first ever automatic winding watch. Here we have a cream lacquer dial with fired blue alpha style hands. There's a little orange 60 at the top of the sub-seconds to remind you that they are Orange Army members. They are from the Netherlands, and orange is the Dutch national color. The Principia case was designed to answer the requests of collectors whose personal preference for watches skewed a little bit smaller than the brothers themselves. They like 43s, but this 39.5, especially with the remarkable contouring of the lugs, case, and bezel, turned out to be the magic formula for them aesthetically, as it opened up the possibility of Grunerfeld ownership to collectors who previously would not have been interested in the 43mm case. It is a spectacular watch, and you can see that when I turn it over, and the movement is as good as it gets. First of all, the Grunerfelds finish everything beautifully. They are alumni of Audemars Piguet, Renault et Papi, and they've continued to finish parts for APRP in the modern era, so it should come as no surprise that on the rotor alone, you have polishing, satination, chiseling, and mirrored anglage all on one rotor. You can see black polish everywhere from the rotor center to the individual screws. They use stainless steel to make their bridges. No one does that. Why? Because it's really hard. Difficult to finish brass, difficult to finish German silver, but steel, more difficult still. They've completely skeletonized a full balance bridge, and they've gone with a full bridge and a free-sprung index for modern resistance to shock-induced timing deviation. They've adjusted this movement in 6 positions, one more than a standard chronometer. When you look at the design, not just the finish, but the architecture of the movement, you can see that the bridges, the finger-style bridges, are designed to resemble the bell gables of the roofs of traditional Dutch houses, so the snow slides right off. No detail is overlooked. You can see golden chaton are used to set the jewels, as it would have been in the pocket watch era, and they are 3rd-generation watchmakers. Their grandfather would have worked on pocket watches. Nothing here is compromised. Everything is top level. Even note that the bridges themselves feature 3 degrees of finishing. They're frosted internally. There's a satin channel around their rims, and then outboard of the satin channel, you get mirrored anglage, that mirrored beveling. So triple finished steel bridges. It does not get any better than that. Throw this watch on the wrist, you can see the Grunerfelds have wrought something beautiful, and it's 47 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, so you could probably even wear this watch on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters circumference. It's about 10.6 millimeters thick, so really thin, and I find this combination of a cream lacquer dial, rose gold case, and ostrich strap to be especially fetching. This is a really handsome watch and a great way to get into independent horology, as the Grunerfelds, from their Oldenzaal headquarters, they only make about 50 to 70 watches a year, so this is real exclusivity. Now, I mentioned that the Grunerfelds are 3rd-generation watchmakers. Their grandfather and father also worked on clocks. And, well, this isn't quite a clock, but it's damn close. Possibly the most imposing ever Panerai timepiece built for the civilian market. This is the 2009 limited edition PAM 341 Egiziano. While the profile says Luminor, in fact, this watch would have originally been built back in the 50s for the Egyptian military, and by request, they would have used the Radiomir, the older radium-based loom. That's how the original Egiziano came equipped. It was like a monster-sized version of the 1950s Panerai 6152 dive watch, and this watch is very true to form, size, and detail. There's a huge domed plexiglass crystal, as the original would have featured. We have an ecru simulated patina loom to basically parallel the aging of an original radium dive, what it would look like in the modern era. The watch is 60 millimeters in diameter in titanium, and it has the broadest lug-to-lug span of any watch I've ever measured at 75.6 millimeters across the wrist. The timepiece is 100 meters water resistant, so you can dive with it. It has a bi-directional rotating bezel like the original, and while the detent is super crisp and wonderfully mechanical, you've heard of 120 click dive bezels, 60 click dive bezels. This is a 12 click dive bezel. The watch internally is powered by the caliber 2002. You can see the Soluro Alanta Corsa, the SLC, or the Pig, the manned torpedo used by World War II era Italian Decima Flotilla combat swimmers. And of course, Panerai did supply watches to those service members at the time. Their first combat watches were made in 1936. By the end of the 50s, most of their active involvement in combat watch manufacture had petered out, but not before one final flourish in the late 50s with this monstrous timepiece. Now throw it on the wrist. I mean, let me be honest, you need a wrist of at least 18 centimeters circumference to wear this. The original would have been oversized and designed to wear over swimming gear, much like oversized pilot's watches designed to be worn over flight suit sleeves. This was never intended for use on a bare wrist. In fact, in some cases, they would have been strapped around a bicep. Now, the movement inside is very impressive. It's exactly what the dial promises, an 8-day power reserve, just like the Angelus SF240 movement that would have been used in the original. Now, you can see, because it is the 2002, I have the ability to independently step the hour hand and travel without checking the minute hand or changing the constant seconds. Now, you can see the watch also has a conventional setting mode, and it is very authentic. Let's do a loom shot real quick. Absolutely overpowering. This timepiece, with an enormous bezel pearl, has 12 clicks to its bezel. Is it a little bit vintage? It's a lot bit vintage. I love everything about this. This is a watch that I could never wear, much less wear with a straight face. A timepiece designed for a big wrist and the ultimate Panerai collector who quite simply needs to have the ultimate. You could see, individually numbered, part of a series of 500 pieces made. Nothing else like it. I've seen 2 of these pre-owned in 7 years, so they do not circulate too frequently. So 60 millimeters, what if you want a mid-size option? And compared to this, the original 2002 Audemars Piguet Royal Oak concept is a mid-size option. Oh, it's not small. It's 44 millimeters in diameter by 18 millimeters thick by 57 millimeters from lug to lug. But this Alacrite 602 cobalt-based case seems almost date-just sized compared to the Egiziano. Now, the watch has everything you would want in an ultra haute de gamme super sports watch. 500-meter water resistance, nearly indelible, as this cobalt-based alloy, Alacrite. It's cobalt, it's chromium, it's tungsten, it's iron, a few trace materials, but just take the cobalt and the tungsten. What does that sound like to you? Super hard, super dense? Better believe it. 430 Vickers. Vickers, well, compare the Vickers of 316L steel, about 200 to 250 Vickers. This is 430 Vickers. Much, much, much harder. The bezel is grade 5 titanium, and there's a lot of nuance here. First of all, this is not an offshore. This is a Royal Oak, and it takes some liberties with Royal Oak design, with a remarkable technical tonneau-style case with a wonderful camber, black polish, and media-blasted alternating facets. The bezel has been bent across the case, and you can see it has a banana-like camber to it, alternately polished and satinated. This is a watch that has just returned from AP factory service, so if you have any questions about whether or not this APRP-based movement is in good health, it is in rude health, having just come back from the factory with a factory service warranty. Now, 150 of these were made from 2002 to 2004. The limited edition powered by caliber 28 or well, it's 2896, but let's get super close right here, and you can see its distinguishing features. You can see everything you would ever want: black polish, satination, media blasting, mirror beveling. This is just the beginning, as the concept is all about the dial side action. This is like having the best parts of the case back on the dial side. You have a dynamograph that lets you know the health of the movement in terms of torque release from the mainspring barrels. So it is a 72-hour power reserve. It has a bit of an unconventional linear scale for reading the power reserve. This is your power reserve indicator, and you gain experience regarding the relative position of the indicator, and you gain the ability to read the relative time. But, you know, if the watch is down to 40% of its power reserve, it's not going to be making optimal mainspring torque, and that's where the dynamograph comes in, giving you something more than just a power reserve indicator. It lets you know when the watch is effectively producing enough torque to keep good time. So you want to keep that indicator in the fat part of the dynamograph scale. There is a tourbillon, a 21/6 beat rate, and you can see it is a free sprung, and it is equipped with an overcoil hairspring, which is a high horology flourish not common on AP watches. It is super shock resistant. Bridges and plates, the movement is made entirely of grade 5 titanium, and as you can see, beautifully hand finished. APRP, or Renault Papi, is the ultra haute de gamme brand of Audemars Piguet. Not a brand so much as a manufacturer within a manufacturer. They make, for example, the ultra high-end Richard Mille watches, and name dropping here, they built the original 1994 A Longa Unzona pour le Marie tourbillon. Now you can see this unique bridge made of titanium. The idea is that this movement is hugely shock resistant, and the balance staff particularly shock resistant because of this displacement. You have a little bit of play built into the titanium squiggle section bridge, so you can really shock this thing mercilessly. And I mentioned it's also scratch resistant and 500 meters water resistant. Now unscrew the crown. We have a multifunction crown system, and you can see the multifunction selector. This is something AP pioneered on its concept watches, and you can also find it on Richard Mille watches. But you see, H is you want to set the watch, N is neutral, and then remonte, or remontage, which is your winding of the watch. This is where you wind the watch, and you can see when you wind the watch, the dynamograph is briefly displaced. This watch has it all going on. An absolute monster, horologically significant. It's not just a big watch. It's as beautifully finished as any minute repeater from Patek Philippe, as any sonnery from F. Journe, as any chronograph from Lang und Heine. This is one of the most important high horology watches of the modern era, a 30th anniversary piece to mark 30 years of the Royal Oak. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.